Right, I think we're good to go. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. So I'm Roseanne Harris. I am the president of the International Actuarial Association for 2022. And I'm really thrilled to be hosting this webinar today. So I should say, first of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. With me, it is the afternoon. I'm in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I am joined by some very inspiring women from various places in the world. But let me first start by telling you that we have been celebrating what we've been calling Women's March rather than just International Women's Day at the IAA. So for the whole month of March, we started by celebrating the rise of women leaders in our profession and getting some really valuable insights from some inspiring female leaders from around the world. So I'd really like to refer you to our diversity and inclusion page on the website of the IAA, where you will be able to see some of the videos that were made, and we spotlighted as well some of the rising women in the profession. Yesterday we uploaded an interview that Lisa Wade, who's on our executive committee, had with Daisy Koch. Now Daisy is a female pioneer and a trailblazer of the actuarial profession, so I'm sure you will enjoy watching that video, and I really commend you to do so. But now we're going to turn to a very important aspect of diversity, which is not only about how we as a profession look and act, but actually how we apply ourselves to the challenges of gender gaps and financial inclusion, and the specific needs of women when we're developing these kind of solutions around risk and financing. So I'd first of all like to welcome all the attendees of the webinar, and thank you for your willingness to be part of this conversation. And please post your questions as we're working through the webinar in the Q&A section of the Zoom that you can see in front of you. But I'm also joined by some very inspiring women, and I've particularly enjoyed engaging with them as we've been preparing for today's event. So first of all, we have Vicky Sapota, who is the chair of the executive committee of the International Association of Insurance Supervisors, and she's also executive director of the Prudential Regulation Authority in the UK and the Bank of England. Vicky holds a PhD in economics and an MPhil in finance from the University of Cambridge, and also BSc in mathematical economics and econometrics from the London School of Economics. So welcome, Vicky. And then we have Hannah Grant. Hannah is the head of the Secretariat of the Access to Insurance Initiative. And if you're not aware, the A2II is a global partnership working to ensure that the world's excluded and underserved have access to insurance. And it's a global partnership of some very illustrious organizations, as I'm sure Hannah will tell us about. Before joining A2II, Hannah worked in Insurance Europe in Brussels as head of international affairs and reinsurance. And she was also running the secretariat for the recently established Global Federation of Insurance Associations. After graduating from Edinburgh University, Hannah started out her career working for Lloyd's in London. And then we have Lisa Morgan. Lisa is a health actuary and technical specialist at the International Labour Organization. She's in the Impact Insurance Facility, where she provides expertise on health insurance and risk pooling mechanisms in the private and public sectors. So while she's been working as an international civil servant for the last 6 years on technical cooperation projects, her career over the last 2 decades also includes working as a consulting actuary at Milliman and PwC in London. And I'd like to particularly mention that Lisa is an alumnus of my university, of Wits University here in Johannesburg, where I still teach. So Lisa, thanks also for joining us today. So let me start first of all by asking each of you to reflect on your own journey as a female leader in the financial services sector, and what the International Women's Day theme of #break the bias means to you. So let's see if we can start with Vicky.
I'm afraid I will have to turn off the video when I speak. Thanks for the introduction, Roseanne, and for the opportunity. I mean, in terms of my personal journey, I've been working in the financial services industry in various roles in central banking and financial regulation of banks and insurance for the last 26 years. And I have to say that at least for the first 10 of them, my gender identity was not something that I was reflecting upon very deeply. I was basically taking the world as I was finding it. It had become completely normal and usual to be in meetings with just men. Most of my seniors were always men of also a particular white men, and I was feeling most of these years that basically I just needed to keep my head down and just do my work as well as I could, work as hard as I could, contribute as best as I could in order to fulfill, to do a good job in an area that I found fascinating. So it was with hindsight, and after I started becoming responsible for others and becoming more senior, that I started reflecting more on my role as a woman, because I realized then that what I had been doing is that I had been adapting, changing in some respect my authentic self in order to be able to do well in a world that didn't include lots of people like me. So just to give you an example, I learned much more about football and cricket than I ever wanted to or I was interested in order to be able to participate in conversations or understand jokes that I was excluded if I didn't understand them, that were happening during work conversations. I also sort of learned not to get offended when people would make very odd comments about kind of work-life balance, making assumptions that as we have a woman would go part-time, and therefore their ambitions would become less for promotion, might become less strong, etc. So that was the past. And it was interesting because in my first senior roles as heads of department, etc., I just carried on with the same behaviors before until I realized that now I could do something different because I had more power, and I could be more and change things. And I was reflecting I started reflecting then on the very few senior women leaders that I had met in my journey so far, and what they had done, and I realized that they had been adapting too, and that it was time to just bring our authentic self to work, and not to have to adapt our behaviors and to be who we are and to call out bad behavior. And the reason for doing so is actually completely corporate. Unless we do increase diversity and inclusion within our own institutions and where we work, we are missing out on huge talent. Because we put off a large proportion of the population that could have done better, that could have stayed, that could have worked better, that could have contributed more, that could have called out wrong decisions, and therefore we are poorer for it. So for me, what International Women's Day and Break the Bias means is how we can become more diverse and inclusive. Thanks for that.
Thanks so much, Vicky. I think touching on the unconscious aspect of it, and even the unconscious accepting of the bias is really an important theme. Hannah, I'm keen to hear your reflections.
Thank you, Rosanna. And I think my starting point is probably a little bit similar to Vicky's. I mean, I started off my career at Lloyd's of London in the insurance market there, actually nearly 20 years ago now. So going back then, I mean, the London market was definitely not a particularly accessible and inviting place for women. I think a lot of business was done on the golf course or sort of over long boozy lunches. I mean, that's not to say that women, I mean, don't enjoy golf. I know some that certainly do, but I mean, it wasn't very accessible, let's say, to women. If you were looking after kids, if you were working part-time, I mean, a lot of business was done actually in sort of times of the day, which I think would not be, or are not sort of accessible to everybody. I'd say I was a little bit sheltered from this because I did actually work for Lloyd's Corporation, actually, as opposed to the market, and that was slightly more diverse. And actually from the beginning, I had a very good female boss who I think was actually also a very strong, probably role model for me actually at the time. And I also feel at that time, actually seeds of change were sort of already underway. So I joined actually very early on, a very newly established diversity and inclusion steering group at Lloyd's. And this was actually a real awakening for me. So I joined it in the first place because I was sort of interested in the topic. But I think as sort of going back to what Vicky was talking about before, I think that sort of changed my maybe subconscious acceptance to really actually realizing it wasn't quite right. And actually that's, we should be challenging behavior which intentionally or unintentionally does sort of exclude women. And I mean, I think since then, it's definitely been a topic that's remained, I mean, very dear to my heart. And I mean, I do think, I mean, very strongly that diversity, and I wouldn't say actually just gender diversity, but diversity more broadly, is incredibly important in organizations and teams. I mean, it makes you more innovative, it makes you more flexible. And that's definitely something I continue to sort of believe in sort of to this day.
And certainly makes the team more effective in making good decisions.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks for that. And Lisa, as an actuary, your reflections.
So, I mean, I would like to also start out by saying I started working over 20 years ago now, and I think when I think back to my days at BITS, the group that was studying actuarial science was already quite male dominated. I mean, I don't think that there were more than about 30% of the class being female. Having said that, not everybody in that class actually went on to qualify as an actuary. But when I started in working in London, I would say that I worked for two incredibly professional firms, and I can't really fault them both in trying very hard to progress the women that were there. But I don't necessarily think that there were issues, within the firms that I worked. But I think society at large has shifted. And I think back to some of the things that were said to me as a young graduate. And now I don't think that they would be acceptable. For example, really discouraging me from having children, having a family, having to choose between the two. And that actually it was not an option to have both. And fairly senior people would hold this view, which I look back now and I think that that's just not really acceptable. I think I also experienced a very heavy drinking culture. So that, and this is not necessarily about which gender you are, but I think if you did want to start a family and maybe go out less, you would be excluded from some of the banter and from some of that camaraderie. And what I did witness was a lot of women dropping out the minute that they became mothers. So I think things have improved, but I still think there is a long way to go. And for me, hashtag break the bias is really about making people aware of their unconscious bias and to stop and critically think about whether the assumptions that they make about people based on their gender are fair. And I think, we all, any of us who know a bit about unconscious bias should know that we all suffer from this. It doesn't matter if we're male or female. Or any non-binary gender orientation. we all suffer from having this gender bias. And I've even caught myself out thinking things and thinking, wow, did I really think that? And if you are listening to this and you actually want to test whether or not you have any gender bias, Harvard University, together with the University of Washington and the University of Virginia, have come up with a test that you can do. It's called the implicit bias test, and I'll share the link in the chat so you can do this afterwards. So for me, the hashtag is about becoming aware, and also about focusing on young girls and getting them into STEM subjects and making that acceptable. Because even in 2022, you will see that girls are still being discouraged from studying these subjects. And that's really where it all begins. We want to see more equality in the classroom, because then that feeds through to the rest of everything. And lastly, just about having more authentic female leaders. So there, Roseanne, over to you.
Thanks, Lisa. No, that's great. And I must say that I think raising awareness is the key. Awareness of ourselves, as well as awareness in others of particularly the challenge of unconscious bias. And I think the other area of awareness which we'll focus on in our discussion now is around awareness of the needs, the specific needs of women and perhaps underserved communities more generally. So Vicky, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about the priorities of the IAIS and how these relate to women's needs and perhaps to diversity more generally.
Yes, thanks for that. The first point to make is that the IAIS, because of its very broad membership, it covers the majority of jurisdictions in the world, more than 90% of jurisdictions, and therefore a lot of emerging and developing countries has always been interested and supported amongst international standard setters of financial inclusion issues, and within that, of course, women's poorer or weaker participation in finance and in financial decision making is an issue and a topic that is especially important. It is something that we do in the IAIS together with partner organizations, and actually Hannah is, who, as you said, heads the Actuarial Insurance initiative, is one of the most important partner organization for us for financial inclusion, and she will be best placed to talk about it. I mean, the whole topic suffers quite a lot from data gaps, but it is an important one, and one that is also a bit sobering, because despite the fact that there are lots of data gaps, whenever you sort of scratch the surface, you find results that are quite striking. So, for example, the Financial Conduct Authority in the United Kingdom which the Conduct Authority in Britain did some work on financial inclusion, and found that this is in a market which, as the audience knows, insurance penetration and financial penetration more generally is very, very high. And also, you may not know that women at the moment in the UK do better educationally in educational outcomes than men in secondary education, get better grades. So despite that, these facts in this advanced economy, women score materially worse than men in financial literacy questions and financial decision questions. But you know what the reason is? The reason is not because they don't know the answers, it's because they tend to know the answers worse than men, because they tend to fill in the I don't know box option more often. So if you remove the I don't know option, men do as well as women. So there appears to be, even in such a market, a lack of confidence for women to undertake financial decisions. And it's something that both the industry, the profession, regulators, and society needs to look at. The second area that the IAS is currently looking into is whether how diversity and equity and inclusion can affect outcomes within the firms that we regulate. And we are starting with doing a stock take of all the work that our members are doing in this field. For example, a number of members taking actions in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in boards and in the governance frameworks of the companies that they supervise. And the reason for this is that there is increasing evidence, although more research is necessary, that greater diversity in boards can lead to better outcomes in performance. Now, there is a need for more research, and not all of the research is unambiguous, but there is increasing evidence of this by preventing groupthink. And I can say, because I lived through it, groupthink is, I lived through it because of decisions that were being made before the global financial crisis we had in 2009. That decisions amongst people who have a similar background and similar type of behavior, and given the pressures to conform that exist already in board and decision-making situations, can be really, really detrimental to organizations, particularly in periods of heightened competition or in periods of crisis. And the way to basically bust groupthink is inclusion as well as diversity, because you need not only to have diverse people in it, but you need to have the openness to listen to them. So let me stop here.
Thanks, Vicky. I think that is a very important warning. As you say, we've had these lessons of history around the risks around groupthink, and it's important that to promote this concept that diversity is not just about giving a seat at a table, but actually improving decision making, improving outcomes, and making actually results more relevant. So Hannah, your organization, the HUI, is particularly focused on inspiring and supporting supervisors to promote inclusive and responsible insurance. So this is, of course, focusing on reducing vulnerability and focusing on those who are vulnerable. But what are the particular challenges that you're experiencing in addressing gender gaps in insurance in terms of that objective?
Yeah, thanks, Rosanna. I think, the first challenge I would mention actually is what Vicky also just touched on there, but it's the lack of gender disaggregated data. When you look for data on the gender gap in financial inclusion, it nearly always refers to the banking, not the insurance sector, with inferences made that if women have less likely or have less access to bank accounts, then it's likely that they probably also have less access to insurance. And this might be the case. Some of the similar challenges apply. Women often have less, they don't have formal IDs, they have less mobile phone ownership. So maybe they do also have sort of less access to insurance. However, at the same time, women are more risk averse. They're more concerned about the risks relating to their family. So in other respects, they actually might be more sort of likely insurance consumers. So I think to really understand the picture about sort of women's access to insurance, there's a real need for more gender disaggregated data to be collected and then very carefully analyzed afterwards, like across different types of products and across different distribution channels, to really understand what the picture is for women's access. But quite a bit of qualitative analysis has been done. And I think through that, certain challenges have been identified. And one of them is just the lack of suitable products on the market. I mean, women are different to men, I mean, particularly when it relates to childbirth and health, and they do have some unique risks and unique sort of insurance needs. And there is a need for more products to be out there to address these needs. ID, I mean, I touched on already. I mean, this is very important for anti-money laundering, know your customer requirements. However, women are less likely to have identification documents. I think in sub-Saharan Africa, it was said that they have 9%, women are 9% less likely to have sort of formal IDs. And then, I mean, increasingly, a lot of financial inclusion is being improved, let's say through digital solutions, but that's not necessarily helping women. Women are 8% less likely to have a mobile phone, and actually 20% less likely to be accessing mobile internet over their phone. So also there, I think they're facing challenges, let's say, in access. And then, I mean, looking at supervisors, I mean, this is very much where, I mean, the A2I focuses. I'd say traditionally, I mean, policymaking has been, let's call it sort of gender neutral, but it hasn't been gender sensitive. And I think that's also a problem. And what I mean by that is when sort of making policymaking decisions, you actually need to think specifically what the needs are and sort of wants of women to make sure that the policies that are made actually do account for any challenges that women might be facing in access, really do think about them as a specific group. And I think this is maybe returning to our earlier theme, but this is really around awareness raising, I feel is needed with supervisors and policymakers. And actually the A2I is doing quite a lot on this. And I mean, I can come back to it later on to tell you a bit more. And then the last thing I think we've all actually touched on a little bit in our own way so far, I think a challenge, and this is maybe more inward looking, is just about having more senior women represented in the insurance sector. And I think I looked at some statistics actually just before this, and I think women only make up 23% of insurance company executives, 10% of CEOs, and 8% of board chairs. So there's a long way to go to get sort of better sort of gender parity at a more senior level.
Absolutely, but really interesting that there can be essentially unconscious bias in how we define distribution channels for products because of gender gaps in terms of access. And I mean, as you've been saying, I mean, there's some interesting statistics, but not always accessible. Lisa, I'm interested in your views from an actuarial perspective around the challenges of collecting data. So, you know, there's the balance between collecting data, gender-based data, so we can understand the challenges and the gaps and where issues of bias are arising. But then there's the risk that the action of collecting data creates the opportunity for discrimination. So some thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, so this is a real challenge because, as Hannah's pointed out, it's so important to have disaggregated data by gender, because if you don't have that, you can't actually measure, whether men and women are equally accessing financial services. I mean, we know that there's a gender protection gap, but if we want to measure that there is improvement in closing that gap, you need to have gender as a field that people fill in. But the trouble is, if they fill it in, they have to trust that the insurance industry is not going to use it as a rating factor. Now, I mean, in some countries, it's illegal to use gender as a rating factor. Where that comes from is that, the thinking is that you should only use things that can influence the way people behave as a rating factor, rather than something they have no control over. And of course, people have no control over their gender. But I guess, the same could be said for age, and that probably could, there's another argument about ageism. But I think regardless, what the statistics show is that regardless of whether or not you use gender as a rating factor, you will find that men and women tend to pay different rates for all types of insurance, because there are other things that might come in as proxies to that. And I think, I think just the point about, that there's positive and negative discrimination. So depending on the type of insurance, a woman can be winners or losers in this. So for example, with car insurance, we know that women are a lower risk. So they tend to land up subsidizing men with motor insurance. And the same with health insurance after the age of 40. But on regular life insurance and on annuities, well, yeah, on regular life insurance, they would lose out if they live for longer than expected, because the net present value of their payout might be smaller than expected. But on pensions, on annuities, they might get paid out for longer, so they could win on that. So, but I think one has to keep this, in proportion, because on balance, there's so many other the factors at play in the world of equality and financial inclusion, that this question of pricing and rating is dwarfed by everything else. For example, I did a podcast recently with Jane Portis in the UK. She's a retired partner from PwC, and she was saying that by the time men and women get to retirement age in the UK, women's pensions pots are 20% that of men's of the same age. So, I think that there are far bigger fish to fry here, but it is an interesting debate, this question of, using gender to rate for rating. But I think it's vital that insurance companies capture this information just to measure financial inclusion.
Thanks, Lisa. And while we're talking, I'll appeal to the audience to put your questions into the chat, and we can weave those into this conversation. But Lisa, I'm aware that you've also been working on a particular project to actively encourage this commitment to addressing gender gaps in insurance. So would you like to share a little bit about that project?
Sure. Yeah, actually, we're really excited about this. So the International Labour Organization, where I work, the Impact Insurance Facility, we've partnered together with IFC about a year ago to set up a community of practice to help insurers who wish to better serve the women's insurance market. And what we know from a prior study done by IFC, AXA, and Accenture, this study was done in 2015, so it's pretty much pre-pandemic, and perhaps the numbers have shifted a bit. But what the study said is that by 2030, the women's insurance market could be worth $1.7 trillion US, with half of this coming from emerging markets. So there is a huge opportunity for insurers if they can get women to use insurance. And likewise, there's a huge opportunity for women if they can better manage their risks, because for example, if you want to take out more of a bank loan, if you can take insurance with that, you can get more capital, you can do better in your business. So there's a huge knock-on effect if you can have access to insurance, both from a personal and also from a business perspective. So what we've done is we invited insurers from across the globe to apply to be part of this community of practice. And we have 20 insurers that have been with us on a journey for the last year, which comes to an end next month, from 17 different countries, looking at different aspects of how they can better serve the women's market. Now, this is a long-term commitment. So, we didn't expect all insurers to, come out after 1 year having made, like suddenly having tons of new female clients and products. But what we did was we asked them at the beginning of the year to pick bite-sized commitments that they could commit themselves to over the course of the year, just to improve things and move things towards better serving the women's market. So that's the work we're doing at the moment, and it'll culminate itself in a quick start guide that we will be publishing together with IFC, hopefully in the next couple of months.
Wow, that's very exciting. So are there any case studies, any experience to date you can share?
Actually, yes. So as I said, many of the participants were on their way to, they hadn't quite reached their destination yet. But what we did as part of the COP is that we invited guest speakers from insurers that we felt were doing a fantastic job in serving the women's market, just to show the others how it was done. And one of the speakers was from an insurer in South Africa, actually, called First for Women. They are an insurer offering car, home, business, and life insurance products. And they are truly inspirational in what they do, because they've really tapped into the needs of South African women, and they've tailored their products to really look after those particular needs. So, for example, what they've done is they've built in like a value-added service component to the insurance, something called Guardian Angels Lifestyle Assistance. Now, for those of you on the call who don't know much about South Africa, there is a problem with gender-based violence, and there is a problem with violence against women in South Africa, as there is in many other countries. But what First for Women have done is that they've given an app, a tool to their clients that they can use their mobile phones. They've got a panic button app that you can tap to get assistance when you need it. They've built in extra things like if you break down, they have roadside assistance that people will be there quickly if you break down. They have home assistance as part of their Guardian Angels, so that if you're looking for a reputable person to come and help, be your plumber, electrician, they've pre-vetted everyone. So, and there's more to it than that, but just to give you the idea, they've added in these value-added services. And they also actively campaign and advocate for women's rights in South Africa, which is pretty amazing. They have a foundation and they've raised money on the side to help with a plethora of things. And I think just, I'd like to just share a 1-minute ad just to show you a little bit about what they're about, because in 2 minutes, I can't really do them justice. But if you'll bear with me, I will just share my screen and show you this ad, and hopefully, oops, is that the wrong screen? Can you see it?
Yes. I think
okay.
So.
All right.
It's
so
your YouTube screen.
All right, good. So I'm going to play it now, and just give me a thumbs up that you can. Oh, can you hear anything?
No sound, unfortunately.
Okay. All right.
Maybe what we should do is share the link in the chat.
Hold on a second. It should work now. Okay. Does it work?
No.
Can you hear it? Okay. Let me just new share. All right. Share sound. Share. Okay. Now?
They try to hold me down, but I refuse.
Yes.
They try to break me down like I was never here. They try to take control, but could not take a hold. They tried to slow me down, but could not break my soul.
Ladies, what would you do if you were fearless?
So yes, I thought I would share that with you. So Roseanne, back over to you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Very inspiring. So I've got a question coming up in the from one of the anonymous attendee around the unpaid care responsibilities. And I think one of the next themes I wanted to touch on actually is the crisis that we've just been through, going through the COVID crisis. Lisa, do you want to unshare, and then we can come back to seeing us?
Okay.
The COVID crisis that we've just been through globally, which has certainly highlighted some of the significant protection gaps, and I think that the one of those gaps that was highlighted was this disproportionate split of unpaid care responsibilities. But I'm keen to hear, Vicky, your views and your thoughts, particularly on how women have been affected during this crisis, and I guess that's one of the themes to touch on.
Yes, I think data is beginning to come in on this issue from several countries. Actually, there was a report only this week in the UK that suggests that unfortunately during COVID, more women have dropped out from full-time work than previously. So as a result of that, female participation, at least at this stage, has dropped relative to what it was pre-COVID. I suspect that this is related to the need for caring, and the need and the associated, which of course we know is unpaid for, and indeed doesn't even count in the GDP statistics. It's not
Wow.
it's not even accounted for as output because there's no price for it. So it's very difficult for economists to include it, which is a long-standing debate. So I'm afraid that the issues that we're discussing in the previous sessions are likely to have been amplified by COVID. So in front of us, we have a bigger challenge. And I think it highlights the importance of breaking the bias and the role that we can have as professionals in regulators, actuaries, people with broader roles in actually closing these gaps. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. And Lisa, then from an actuarial perspective, what have you seen in terms of the expanding gaps or these protection gaps that have emerged during COVID?
Yeah, so working for the International Labour Organization, actually quite a lot has been published in the last couple of months on this topic. And we know that the COVID-19 crisis has caused unprecedented job losses and hitting women in the hardest. One of the papers in October 2021 said that women's employment to population ratios declined proportionately more than men's for all country income level groups, particularly in middle income countries. So we don't have the specific data on how this has impacted insurance, but I think one can extrapolate and say, well, you know, if more women have lost their jobs, then they're not going to be buying insurance. So I think, yeah, we can expect that there is a trickle-down effect.
Thanks, Lisa. And I mean, it's an issue in the job market, but I guess also in terms of things like of health protection, access to health insurance going forward, and looking at how products are going to evolve to hopefully be inclusive of these risks rather than excluding these risks to address the needs of protection gaps. And I think that's a particular challenge for us as a profession to make sure we are embracing risk rather than just simply passing it on to the most vulnerable.
One thing I would add, sorry, just to say that what I have seen in a couple of markets is that there've been some of the insurers have responded by giving premium holidays. And others have, who previously didn't cover things like COVID, actually then covered COVID stays. So I think that there has been a little bit of a reaction from the insurance industry that we've seen, but I think to quantify it is quite difficult.
Yeah, and certainly something we all need to be vigilant about. But let's circle back to looking at women in leadership positions. And I guess the concern which a number of you have expressed about the low numbers of women in senior roles in financial services. So I guess the question is, what is driving this? What can be done? I mean, why are we not seeing women taking up the statutory and appointed actuary roles? Vicky, do you have some thoughts on this from your sort of supervisory position?
I mean, the situation is improving. We are seeing greater female participation in senior roles in supervisory organizations, regulatory organizations, and indeed in the financial services industry in certain jurisdictions across the world. So there's no question that the situation is improving. I mean, amongst the actuarial profession, I mean, Lisa and yourself will be better placed. But I was looking at the UK Actuarial Association's numbers. The situation is about a third of the profession are women, and it has increased over recent years from about a fifth. Although I think there is still a problem about women dropping out from the profession much earlier than men, that may still be associated with the issues that Lisa was talking about, that she had encountered earlier on in her career. So the situation is improving, but we are not yet at gender parity. And the question is why not? I think it is, and to be frank, I don't have a great answer on this, other than saying that there needs to be a degree of positive action within leading institutions, within any institution, not positive discrimination, positive action, to ensure that these gaps are closed. I do think targets help, and making these targets public also help, and accounting and publicly saying, you know, I'm aiming for gender parity by a particular date, and then publicly disclosing how well you have done could help, because that is the only way to change incentives within it. I mean, other issues that could help is ensuring that senior managers and senior leaders take into account the diversity statistics and the diversity targets in the performance and the remuneration. So all of those things will help ultimately break the bias. So my sense is that without positive action and all the mechanisms I've just described, we are not going to get there fast enough.
Yeah, thanks, Vicky. It is, I mean, it is quite daunting, but as you say, the change is happening. I mean, I'm the fourth female president of the IAA. When I was president of the South African Actuarial Society, I noted that there were as many female actuaries as there were actuaries when I first qualified. So over that period, the proportion of female actuaries in the profession went from around 7% up to around 35%, but it seems to have got stuck at that level. Hannah, is that the kind of experience that you're seeing in other markets around the world, in the supervisors that you're working with?
Yeah, no, I think I mean, similar to the observation you've made there. I mean, over the last 20 years, I mean, I've definitely seen a positive improvement in the number of women in senior positions. However, and as you just made that point, in some cases it's now bottoming out. So it's improved, let's say women have got to a third, but then it's not getting better from that. So I was also just making, I mean, some reflections on that. And I mean, vital is to have women to pick from, like in the selection pool in the first place. And I mean, this really just goes down to the education system and women coming through studying the right subjects, which gives them an opportunity to move into, I mean, professions like the actuarial profession. And that goes back to then your choices at probably your choices at high school, followed by your choices at university. And I think we really need to think about the way that the subjects are taught. It's not just sort of encouraging women to sign up for them, but it's also making it interesting and attractive, I think, when they're taught it. I mean, I actually did physics A-level, and I remember somebody saying at the time, actually women and men should be taught actually physics differently. Because of our different way that we relate to the subject and the way that you describe some of the processes, like that really resonate and make sense actually to women, is actually slightly different to the way that men need to have something in that way explained. So actually when women are taught this single sex sort of way, they actually perform better, which does make me think that we really don't need to just encourage women, let's say, to sign up for the courses. We actually need to look a little bit more at like how they're taught. Are they taught in a way that is actually sort of accessible for both men and women? And probably in the past, I mean, going way back, they might have well been designed more with men in mind. So with that, we actually now need to actively think, you know, what can be done to make this course more attractive, more interesting, also for more females to be signing up. And then hopefully after that, that does then mean you have a larger sort of pool of good, strong women to select when you're looking to appoint sort of senior actuaries. And then, I mean, it's things you've probably heard before, like having very good role models. I know that's definitely made a difference to me through my career. Sort of strong female leaders that I've seen have definitely been very inspiring. And then the culture. I mean, the culture has to be accessible and open for women. And this goes back to also making sure it's a flexible environment, that people who are doing caring jobs on top, part-time responsibilities, that actually they can also, if they want to do this, they can fit it with their job. But also the same for men. I mean, it should be an environment where people can flexibly, I think, work, which often, because women have the caretaking responsibilities, they need it more. But I think that also needs to be there to make these sort of more senior positions more accessible. Because I think very often, and certainly in the professions that I'm in, you need someone full time when they get to the top. And I think you need to have more consideration about whether these sort of top positions could also actually be done as maybe a job share or something like that.
Interesting. And I think we've certainly learned a lot about working more flexibly during the pandemic. Perhaps one of the positive side effects of the crisis we've gone through is that we've broken through some barriers that we thought we're not able to break through, in terms of being able to work in a more flexible way. Although in some cases, of course, added to the stress. I'm keen to hear from the audience. If you've got any thoughts, please put them into the Q&A. But Lisa, let's from an actuarial perspective, how do we address this imbalance? And it is interesting that it's not everywhere. I've been told that in the Caribbean, the problem is the opposite, is actually encouraging the men to enter the profession. So there are some areas, and even in some areas of Eastern Europe, where the profession is dominated by men, but certainly overall it's not the case.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know if I have a huge amount more to add, because I think as Hannah said, and I might have said the same earlier, like, if you don't have the big pool of people to choose from, you're going to have smaller numbers at the top. So, I think, and I've certainly seen this, that, there are fewer and fewer women as the more senior you get. And so, of course, there are going to be fewer appointed actuaries who are women. And I have seen improvements over the years, but I think it does seem to have plateaued even in my 2 decades of working. And I think this is a complex subject. It's not just the actuarial profession. I think that this is why books such as Lean In and others have been written. So I think there's sort of there's kind of a demand and a supply side here issue. So I think that women also maybe need to lean in more, and the environment needs to make it easier for them to lean in. So yeah, I'll just leave it there, because I think otherwise I'll repeat what others have said.
Thanks, Lisa. But I think those are important messages to be repeating, and I certainly subscribe as well to what Vicky was saying about targets rather than quotas. It's certainly a question that I've been asked on a number of occasions, is whether there should be a requirement, and I fear that they would actually have the opposite effect. But having the visibility and the targets is certainly a good way to nudge movement in the right direction. So as we go into the last few minutes of our chat today, and I must say I found this really interesting convergence of views. I'd like to just get your thoughts in terms of what the profession can be doing to support women to engaging better with insurance products, and perhaps what can be happening in the regulatory environment as well to support this. So let me just go to each of you and ask just really for some closing comments on these topics. Vicky, can I start with you?
Yes, I'll focus on the regulatory environment, and I will leave to Lisa the actuarial profession. I mean, I think that for regulators, it's a tricky balance that needs to be struck here, because regulators have their own objectives that they need to focus. They tend to be technocrats, similar to actuaries, actually, in that front, and they're not elected by the public, and they're generally focused on whatever the legal requirements are. So generally for insurance regulators, it's policyholder protection and conduct regulation, treating customers fairly. So it is very important that any action that is taken in the diversity, inequity and inclusion field that is directed from regulators to supervisors to be grounded on regulatory objectives, how they can strengthen objectives while taking into account the broader social trends. So this is a point that I didn't make earlier, but I think it is very important because otherwise, from a regulatory perspective, there will be overreach into social policy more generally, which is more government rather than regulators. So it really needs to be grounded on analysis of actual problems that affect policyholder protection and ultimately consumer fairness. Secondly, now within that, as I said, I think there are topics where diversity and equity and inclusion is a real issue for regulators, and we addressed those earlier. The second point is that I think regulators, and that might be true for actuaries too, need to look inwards within the way that they're running their own professions, their own institutions, and ensure that they are walking the talk, whether they're preaching outwards, they're actually developing best practice inwards. Is particularly important for regulators might have supervisory expectations outside. They need to actually do even better than the firms that regulate or ultimately as well.
Vicky, you're breaking up quite a bit at the moment, but I think we're getting a very strong message from you about walking the talk and making sure that that we're practicing what we preach. And I think that's a very good message to the profession as well as to the industry. So it's not just a question of looking outwards, but also looking inwards. So I think that's a very nice message. Hannah, do you want to pick up on that in terms of your closing remarks?
Sure, I will pick up sort of on the role of regulators, but maybe first just say my one key ask is almost where I started, just saying gender disaggregated data. I think where the actuarial profession can also support that being done, more the better, and it's something we all need to do together. And then with respect to supervisors, I think, picking up a little bit on what Vicky was saying, and certainly within the supervisors' mandates, but I think they can look at look at the policies and regulations they're putting out just to see if they do have any unintended consequences for women's access to insurance. So be it sort of distribution channels or KYC requirements, just examine and see, I mean, within the consumer protection sort of role they play, but to see if there is a chance to allow the distribution channels that are needed and maybe relax some KYC where it might help to enhance women's access. And then I think, the second one, is around financial consumer education. Supervisors definitely play a key role here. And I've seen some very nice examples where supervisors have driven some very good women's access campaigns. And then just the last thing I wanted to mention was just the supervisor's role in just bringing stakeholders in the market together. And I've seen this a few times, particularly in Argentina, where the supervisor organized a round table, got the Ministry of Finance there, also got insurance companies and other from the market to all sort of look at the challenges, to women's access together and to think collectively about what can be done. But then maybe I end that by saying also, what you're doing today and what you've been doing for the last month, I think, that's great. It's bringing everyone from the actuarial profession together to examine the challenges that have been seen about women's access, but also women's empowerment within the sector. And I think that's also really important.
Thanks so much, Hannah. And I see Peter Withy's comment in the chat as well about creating awareness amongst those who don't realize the privilege that they do have. And certainly that's a key focus for us in having these kind of events. So Lisa, the last word to you.
Okay, great. So I've made a little list. Let me go through this. So I think the actuarial profession can look inwards, and then those working in insurance can also look inwards within their own companies and then outwards as well with what they do. So I think things that we can do, practical things, we can wherever we can support programs that help women, young girls get into STEM subjects. We can offer getting involved in mentoring type programs. I've been involved as both mentor and mentee in a couple of leadership women's programs, and it makes a huge difference. So I think getting more women and men involved in these things is really good. I think some kind of leadership course that's aimed at women would also be super powerful. So I was on a leadership course for women at the ILO, which was organized for women within the UN system. And again, that was really powerful. So I think something like that within the actuarial profession could be really helpful. I think what you can do within companies is you can organize unconscious bias training, because even though a lot of people do know about it, I think it's not totally mainstream. So I think there are lots of coaches out there who like to talk about unconscious bias. And then within the actual products that you design. So I think, just focus on women in all the work that you do, mainstream gender. Think about the women clients out there. Design products for women by knowing that women maybe are less financially literate. Get rid of jargon, complicated jargon in all the literature that you use. Create gender champions within your business and get excited about it, because it is a business opportunity. It's not just about helping, achieve the UN's SDG on gender equality. I think there's also a very strong business case for this. And lastly, look out for our guide, because as I mentioned, the ILO and IFC will be publishing a guide in the next 2 months or so to help insurers better serve the women's market. Thank you so much, Roseanne.
Thanks, Lisa, and we'll certainly put a link to that on our D&I website of the IAA, as well as that video on the experiment that you shared with us earlier, which demonstrates exactly that point about jargon. So I can't thank you enough for being part of this conversation. So Hannah and Vicky and Lisa, thank you so much, and also to everyone who has listened in today. And this video will be up on our website, so you can share it as well with your network in terms of people that you feel will benefit from listening to this. And I think a key message is that inward looking, and certainly trying to shake things up a bit and make sure that those who need to be thinking about these topics are thinking about them. And that's what we have been aiming to achieve with our Women's March. So thank you so much for helping us to make this a reality in terms of Actuarial Women in March of 2022. So thanks everyone, and stay safe, and see you very soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.